I'm sure that your homebrew scenario is wonderful, but really, I don't give a fuck. We're going to be talking about how there is a separation between what is homebrew, what is stuff that you have created, or maybe just the way that you play the game, versus what is first-party content that can be fairly objectively reviewed. And this is very important because, for an example, Wizards of the Coast has started to push every single race and class in pretty much every setting book that they have released. And I think that that's very strange, because I really like the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons style, or even previous versions where each race and class sort of has a specific role, and they only exist in specific places around the world. They all have certain dispositions. And I think that 5th edition, and pretty much all the 3.0 derived games, make it such that every class is much too similar to each other already. Each race is also much too similar. Anyone can sort of do anything. And that's a big problem for me. And now they're just making it feel even more all the same, because every setting is just going to be completely homogenous. They will have the exact same balances of pretty much every race and class. And I was thinking that's an issue, and that doesn't really make much sense until somebody came along and said that I should just homebrew it. And that's a fantastic solution around my gaming table if I were to play 5th edition, which I don't. I could just change the setting and then play however I like. And yeah, that's a very good solution on a personal level. Between you and your gaming group, you can absolutely make whatever changes that you want to whatever material that you play with, and it shouldn't really be a problem. But the issue is that this is actually a product that a company is selling. Wizards of the Coast is selling copies of not Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. They're selling that. They're selling the setting books for it as well. So I'm talking about the product that is actually on the pages of these books. The rules regarding the races, the rules regarding the settings, or the flavor text that regards the settings even. And homebrewing doesn't actually change that. So for example, I really like to play Pathfinder. But let's say somebody came along and they don't like Pathfinder at all. So they change all of the rules of Pathfinder, because of the way that they like to play, to just be Shadowrun 3. Everything from the setting down to every single rule has been changed to Shadowrun 3rd edition. And then somebody comes along talking about Pathfinder, and they're saying, like, it's a good game, but it has a couple of problems. And someone says, yes, I have homebrewed the entire game to be the perfect game, and I've changed everything. That actually doesn't help, because one person's trying to talk about the positives and negatives of the rule system. The other person's talking about a completely different game, because you've changed the game, and now we're talking about your custom version of the game. Obviously, no one does things that are quite that extreme. Some people do create their own games, like DM Johnny plays the last edition. I know that Professor Dungeon Master on Dungeon Craft plays a completely custom version of Dungeons & Dragons as well. So maybe in that situation you could talk about their homebrew game, because there sort of is a whole established codified rule system around that. But if you just change a few rules in any game, I don't think that you're changing it to the point where it's a completely different game. I just think that telling people, oh yeah, I just changed it, that's not helpful at all. When someone's actually trying to evaluate the quality of something, and you start talking about a different subject, it's not helpful at all. So, as an example, D&D 4th edition. People who haven't played it, generally, say that it kind of sucks. And there's definitely a lot of problems with it. I'm not a massive fan of it. It's okay. But it's too heavy of a tabletop war game. But I just changed it. In the way that I play Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, it's just Pathfinder. So now you can't talk about Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition sucking. Right? I don't like the setting of Shadowrun 3. So I just changed it to a fantasy setting. So now you can't talk about the setting sucking because, well, my homebrew invalidates that, so it's not a relevant criticism to me. That's not true. These games actually are books that you're supposed to read from and play in a certain way. Obviously, it's free form because it's not like a video game where it's whatever's in the game you can do. You can do things that are not planned for by the designers, and that's a wonderful part of the game. But the ridiculous modifications that people make don't actually change what's in the book, and especially they don't change what's in the book for other players. If you're having a hard time wrapping your head around this, here's an example. Half-Life is a fantastic first-person shooter. I really like it. But you can't tell me, like, if I had a problem with some element of Half-Life, like I don't like how the MP5 in that game sprays. I don't like the spray pattern. And then you tell me, oh yes, I've just modified it, so now Half-Life is a better game. No, your modification of Half-Life might be a better game, but we're talking about the actual game that was released. So it's sort of an irrelevant point. You can bring that up to say that, like, this is such an issue that I went through the trouble of fixing it, and this shows how Valve could have made it better. Sure. But that does not make the actual base game better. If Wizards of the Coast releases a garbage game, like 5th edition, and you change everything to make it better, that does not change the rules that are in the book. You can give, in the same way that you can give Valve credit for having great mod support and allowing you to make your modification of Half-Life that makes the changes that you want to see. You could give Wizards of the Coast infinite credit for being a springboard for creativity, creating a rule system with which you have made the finest homebrew creations. And you can give them credit for that, absolutely. But you can't say that they get credit for the entirety of your creation. You can't say that if you rebalance the races, for example. You can't say that in D&D, orcs get -5 intelligence, right? That's not in the rule book. That's just something that you created. It doesn't actually change the quality of the game. And it really drags down conversations about the quality of the game when people start to do this shit. The other thing to consider is that when game developers, tabletop role-playing game developers, are making their splat books and additions to their games, you can't include that if you're just talking about a core rulebook. So, for example, the Pathfinder core rulebook is very solid. It has a lot of information in it. It's much better laid out than a lot of other game rulebooks. And it has a great amount of information in it. But if you're talking about the core rules of Pathfinder, you can't say, no, this is rewritten in Ultimate Combat, so now it's not a problem with Pathfinder. That's just not how that works. You can say that's a problem with the core rulebook that became that a solution was presented for in Ultimate Combat, but that's still an additional piece of work. It's still first party. If you were talking about Pathfinder holistically as a system, then that would be a proper solution. But the books don't necessarily influence each other. So, in conclusion, if you're talking about a specific game, you should talk about specify which parts of the game you are talking about, be that the core rule book, the player's handbook, whatever your game has. And then there should be a line in your mind between what is actually on the page and what is your own creation. And your own creation can very well be inspired by what the developers have done with their setting, with their rule system, etc. That's fine, and that's actually an intended part of a lot of tabletop role-playing games. But they don't get credit, and their holes are not plugged. The holes in their rule book are not plugged for every single player because you have changed the rules or you have changed the setting or something. I get that for a lot of people, D&D is sort of this like ultimate liberating experience. They've never played a game like it before, and you can go anywhere and you can do anything. But that does not change the game experience for every single other player because you do something a certain way. and it makes it almost impossible for you to be able to talk about and evaluate the quality of any tabletop role-playing game if people think like that. And I think that's very important going forward as tabletop role-playing games are getting more and more eyes on them, that we sort of draw a line between what is the quality of a first-party work and what have people tacked on their own that we can look to as a suggestion, for sure, but isn't in the rule book and might actually be illustrating a void or a failure of that rule system, actually.